The beauty of the internet is that whenever you are there to say your opinion, someone is there almost 5 minutes later to tell you how wrong you are. In my Caribbean Blue review, I said how concession was the pinnacle of the furry community, and a guy took the liberty of telling me that I was wrong and that Two Kinds is actually the best furry comic out there, according to a specific webpage. I am happy to see that that is not true, and instead the far more liked webcomic is a webcomic known as Dreamkeepers. Why am I so happy about that? Because Two Kinds is a super freaking meh comic. It's bland, it's boring, the art is nothing spectacular, and the plot is so fucking ridiculously easy to predict that it's almost painful. Then why is it so popular and widely talked about? It's the same thing with female actresses wanting to make it big and then ends up in a sleazy office where they need to take off their clothes and sit on a very specific couch. Two Kinds is popular because of its heavy sexual themes as well as its manga-esque style. And if I hear another guy telling me that it is a manga, I'll find out where you live, find a construction worker, feed him Mexican food, and then pay him money to break into your house and take a shit in your white laundry. Diabolical! Why all this talk about Two Kinds? Because I'm just so happy to see that this comic is doing better than that shit. Dreamkeepers has literally taken every prejudice I had on the furry comic community, wiped its ass with it, and made me its bitch. I had no idea what I was in for when I first started reading this, and boy oh boy am I glad I got to review this diamond in the endless sea of furry porn. So if you're creating a furry webcomic, pay attention now, cause this review will more or less just be me telling you how it's done, and using Dreamkeepers as an example. The keyword for this comic is conveyance. Conveyance is how a comic gives you information. The difference between good conveyance and bad conveyance is whether or not you give a fuck or if you can digest it. To stay true to form, let's use video games as an example of the good and bad ways of conveying information. I tried to find a book with bad conveyance, but couldn't remember one. Take that as a hint as to what bad conveyance can do to your story. Our two combating opposites for this example will be Final Fantasy XIII and a good game. Let's pick Persona 4. In Persona 4 you don't know anything about the world of the shadows coming into the game, and thus your character draw conclusions in accordance to the information you are given. Sometimes these conclusions are wrong, and your conclusions change as more information is given to you. In other words, the information is conveyed in a steady pace where you learn more and more alongside the characters in the game. Then there's Final Fantasy XIII. Fucking Final Fantasy XIII. I believe this game is the worst game I can think of in terms of conveyance. Anyone who has played this mess for more than 3 hours should know what I mean. When you boot up the game, a bunch of shit happens that you got no idea or relation to, and then you're given a fucking codec to read. It's like giving you the entire collection of Lord of the Rings when you enter the cinema to watch The Hobbit and ask you to read them during the trailers. You are forced to sit on your ass and read up on this information. It's not told to you, it's not explained, you just have to fucking read it! So why all this talk about conveyance? The most important thing in a story in a fantasy world is conveyance. It's not the world, it's not the law, it's the conveyance. Having an amazing world but horrible conveyance is like having an amazing car but not knowing how to drive it. Bad conveyance is when you more or less cram needless information upon needless information down the reader's throat, and you make it seem unnatural. The good way of doing so is sitting down and asking yourself, what information does the reader need to know at this point for this to make sense, and then give that information, or maybe even purposely leave something out to make a reveal later. So a good author should pace oneself and not be in a hurry to tell everything at once. You have probably already guessed it, but Dreamkeepers has a very awesome way of conveying its story. Dreamkeepers takes place in a magical dream fantasy world in which we meet Maze, Nama, Lilith and a bunch of other people who are all drawn into a horrible plot to release nightmares onto the dream world, being framed for the murder of your best friend and having your dad's fiancé planning to kill someone. Things could be better in the dream world. What could hardly be better is this story. My god, is it a work of art. You take a rather simple plot, some easily recognizable characters, and then you just expand and expand. The one murder becomes a part of a plot, and the characters you thought hardly had any deaths turns out to be far deeper than you first expected. By constantly expanding on shit you already know, you're never quite taken out of the loop. That, however, doesn't mean that Dreamkeepers doesn't introduce new stuff periodically, but in a good pace. What I talked about before with conveyance becomes abundantly clear when you are introduced to the comics world. Stuff you already know perfectly well, but maybe in a different shape or form, isn't spent hours on being drilled into your skull. Like, there's these technical scrolls, for example. You don't exactly know what they do, but then Lilith says she'll contact Maze through it, and there you go. Now you know this is a scroll that is like a phone or something. That's it. No stupid long ass lectures about how they work, because who gives a fuck? Filter away the needless shit and keep the useful shit. Like, are you trying to tell a story or are you trying to make a magic science project? The story of Dreamkeepers follows a wide array of characters and how they are mixed into the whole thing. Mostly the story centers around the orphan Maze, the pretty Lilith who is a daughter of some big high official, and the spunky Nama, Lilith's sister. Everything seems fine and dandy until Maze's childhood friend gets brutally murdered and he gets pinned for the crime. When he needs to prove his innocence and get revenge, we meet Nama, who is a girl that her father has done the best to hide from the world, who overhears her dad's fiancé who is planning to kill someone. One step takes the other, and before you know it, you are neck deep in a story that you can hardly put down again. With every turn of the page, you're literally holding your breath because everything can happen. Let's just take a moment to go over everything this comic does right. 1. It kills one of the first and most adorable characters you ever see in the comic. This makes you unable to say, this character won't die because she's important to the plot. 2. It changes the dialogue between characters. The high fancy official people talk fine and dandy, while the street slum people will have an accent and swear. 3. You have characters who speak Spanish. Deaf! 4. It tells you just enough to keep the story going, but at the same time leaves a lot out to make you enthralled in the mystery. 5. I can't stress enough how great the dialogue is. Even small little things that has been said that you don't think about becomes key factors later on. And 6. It conveys information, and because of its special way of doing so, by going back and reading it over again, you suddenly understand far more. As for the bad things, really, there's hardly anything bad to talk about in the writing. I guess if I had to say something, it'd be that some of the names in the comic are a little too fantasy for the sake of being fantasy. Like, you got Maze and Randy and Lilith, and then you got fucking Unaikul and Nabonidus. Like, the moment you need an X or a C, especially if you need a freaking apostrophe, then it's a little much. I am King Narux Levi Samanyo Galtrak Vas Romkul, and I demand your finest bitches and 40s. It's fine when you're naming a country or city something big and fancy, but remember, these people were once kids, so try and imagine their names being something yelled by their parents. There's also a little complaint in how Maze falls in love with Lilith. Now I'm gonna say something, and feel free to stop me if you think that I'm a little mean. Or in fact, if you think that I'm saying something that's a little mean, welcome to the webcomic belief, asshole. You got a character here who bumps into this other character. They have hardly talked or anything, and immediately the character falls head over heels in love with the other person. So much that the character is willing to put himself in danger to save the other. If this sounds a little like what's happening in Twilight, then good, cause it's exactly the same thing. Given it's better handled than Twilight, of course, and it becomes better and more understandable later, but at first it seems really forced. But really, that's basically it. You really got a beautiful, well-told story here. And I know there'll be a lot of you guys asking, so let's just get it out of the way before we move on. What's the fur porn like? Is there any? Well, a little, yeah, but like we established in Caribbean Blue, I don't mind the porn and sex. I just don't like it thrown in my face like a flabby flaccid penis like in Concession, Toucans or Sonichu. There it almost feels like the author went,
oh jeez, people are starting to realize I can't write a fucking story to save my fucking life. Well, when in doubt, draw porn.
The sex and stuff in Dreamkeepers is handled just peachy. You got hot men, you got sexy women, you got strippers, you got prostitutes, you got innuendo and sexy poses, but it makes fucking sense! The sexy poses and strippers are in a strip club. The innuendo is used to distract guards, and the prostitutes appear in the underground to give it a sketchy underground feeling, and at the same time giving you exactly the fan service you wanted. I mean, these two freaking indigos may or may not become my next desktop background in the near future.
That's more or less the entire review right there. Furry's so hot that even Rice likes them.
Yes! Yes! I've been waiting for so long to talk about this art. I'm gonna throw a sentence out there now, and this will more or less divide the entirety of this video's viewers into people who agree with me and people going, how the hell can you say that? Are you ready? This art is Disney-esque.
Now, before you start throwing bottles at me, you person sitting in front of a computer screen in an entirely different country than me, who apparently has a super good throwing arm, let me clarify what I mean.
Look at this. Fucking look at it. I don't even know where to begin. There's just so much to talk about. I guess we can start with the second best thing about the art, cause the best thing needs to be talked about on its own. But I just really love the style. When I first was introduced to this comic through a trailer on YouTube, the first thing that really jumped to my mind was how unique the style is. No character is even remotely close to be drawn like any other. This style is none other than David's own.
And you know how much I love that.
Caribbean Blue, Pikachu and Toucans are all heavily inspired by mangas. So much so that some people, other retards, are referring to them as a manga. But Dreamkeepers on the other hand keeps itself to its own style. This comic has an amazing cartoony style that blends amazingly well with the adult themes at the same time. I mean, imagine the extremely cartoony Jessica Rabbit having more screen time and you got a pretty good idea of what I mean by that.
I'd grind my crotch against an electric barbed wire fence and coat it in jalapeno sauce before shoving it into a metal bucket full of glass shards just to hear her burp through a slightly soundproof sleazy hotel wall. Again, I need help.
Now, let's talk about the thing I love the most about this art. It's colors. Yes! Oh god, yes! I didn't even know before I went into reading this, but this comic does something I thought was long since dead in the world of webcomics. Theming. Every major character in this comic has their own corresponding color. If it's not from their fur, it's from their clothing, and I just love how it's not feeling forced at all.
If the colors of this comic was a chick, I would invite her out to a nice seafood restaurant and pay the bill and call her for a second date.
Why do I love this so much? In addition to already having unique and different characters by giving them their own corresponding colors, you're making them that much more unique. Plus, it just looks really good. Actually, everything in this comic looks good. The background especially are freaking amazing, and it shows that David didn't just come up with this on the fly. Everything feels natural for the world and creative. It feels unique and like everything else a lot like its own thing.
I think that's what best describes the art of this comic, that it is in its own style. It's not like any other style. You can't sit down and say, oh, this shit reminds me of that one comic. At least I can't.
What more can I possibly compliment? How about the freaking fact that when doing establishing shots like these, David goes as far as to include the person in question in the big shot. And just fucking look at all this creative details there is in everything. This chick, this shop, this dress, everything is worked on down to the nitty freaking gritty. A word you'll never hear about this art is that it is lazy. I can't help but feel that whenever someone asks David, "Oh, is this one done?" he'd be like, "What? It's hardly even halfway there."
Maybe it's because I had a physical copy of it, but I honestly felt like I had gone out and bought a big fancy book from a major company and was reading something that had 18 writers and 20 artists behind it.
I hope just from seeing these images, you can tell I'm not singing this comic high praises for no reason. Everything just looks great. But hey, it's a fantasy world. How about the fantasy things? How do they look?
Do I really need to say it?
Freaking awesome! I got no idea why the characters needs to have a halo looking thing over their head when they use magic, or why the shotguns apparently have springs in the shells, but I'm sure there's a good reason, and I just love that it is there. Plus, it makes sense. You can sort of imagine it in an everyday life. When making fantasy, many people tend to make shit fantasy-ish for the sake of it being fantasy. Like, again, the extremely mediocre toucans and this big freaking tower. Like, fuck off with that shit. What good could any of that shit possibly do? Or how about a more famous example, practically anything in fucking World of Warcraft? Like, really? When the fuck would you need floating furniture?
Gee, I would sure like that DVD of Backdoor Slots 9 3000 up there. If only I could fucking fly. Blizzard, you dumb cunts.
It's the same thing with sci-fi. Like, look at any bad sci-fi movie and you'll see a fucking chair that looks like a freaking small rocket ship. I guarantee it. Anyway, the characters are also great, though it kind of cheats a little with it being furries, so you don't have to work nearly as hard to make two characters seem different. But it works, so who the fuck am I to complain? Also, can we just take a moment to appreciate how utterly fucking awesome this guy looks? I want to see more of this guy. He looks fucking scary and awesome at the same time.
But to stop me from splooshing anymore on the art, let's talk about what could use a little help.
The borders of the individual frames are not your typical comic style, which is nice. But because of their rather sketchy look, it can sometimes be hard to see if it's even supposed to be a frame or if it's in the same shot as the other. Especially in the fight scenes, which are super radical and way better than any other fights I've seen in webcomics, though they too could use a little tweaking. All in all, in the scenes where a lot of stuff is happening, it can sometimes be a little hard to keep track of what is going on. It's sort of a mixture of because David wants to have everything as detailed as possible, plus how much he experiments with frames and the likes, but maybe tone down the amount of details during fights. Like, the fight between Lilith and the rhyming slime is easily some of the most nerve-wracking shit I've ever read, and I could follow it all the way through cause there wasn't a billion of different things flying around.
Yeah, you got literally no excuse for not knowing what I'm talking about right now. You should have stopped this review a long time ago and started reading this instead of hearing this jackass right here talk. So let's be honest here.
You've heard me gush about the premise and the art and it's all fine and dandy, but we all know nothing is perfect. The characters is the only flaw of this comic and wow, a flaw it is. These are the most suckiest characters I've ever seen.
I'm just fucking with you. These characters are the tits.
First of all, we got Mace, the fox, I suppose. The closest thing this story has to a protagonist. Despite being a guy who seemingly takes the easy way out of daily mundane tasks, he has a strong sense of justice and knows how to use his head. He's usually the guy coming with the witty remarks and seems to be the only one really understanding his pet, Ryu Neko, Whip.
Oh god, another one? Let's see here. Neko means cat, Ryu means dragon, so Ryu Neko means dragon cat. That actually makes sense. Fucking cats.
Next on the list is Lilith, a cat, the brains of the series, so to speak. While her existence seems to be more or less just to serve a trope of Aries stomach needing one, Every similarity to any other comics token bookworm stops there. Lilith isn't a timid, shy, clumsy and silent secluded girl like many other webcomics, but is instead resolute, polite and has a backbone worth praising. It's also nice to see her actually using her wits and knowledge for other than just exposition, which a lot of comics tend to do.
Like Hope in Final Fantasy 13 too. Oh my god, the world is ending. This doesn't make sense. Good fucking thing we have fucking hope for literally no other reason than to explain what the shit is going on. Man, fuck Final Fantasy 13. God damn!
Lilith has a super rad sister who's she's hellish imp? I don't fucking know. Anyway, Nama is a child who was never supposed to happen and has been kept a secret by her douchey dad. She is probably the most self-sufficient character of all the protagonists, and it makes sense having had to more or less take care of herself her entire childhood. She's very protective of her sister and is often the comic relief when things get a little too serious, because she's always seems so distant to what is happening.
She's the first one to use her powers in the comic, and I gotta admit, I would kinda have liked if she had dwelled a little more on that fact, seeing it's a pretty big thing.
Tagging along with the heroes, we got Bastion. Bastion is a super cool dude, even if he's first introduced as Mace's love rival for Lilith's affection. There's no doubt that Bastion comes from a less than spectacular part of the town, and he definitely has an attitude problem, but there's no doubt that he has his heart in the right place. As opposed to, so many other characters with attitude problems, Bastion is actually likable, because his attitude problem is never straight out bullying.
There's a hard thin tightrope when it comes to characters like these. You fall on one side and your character is just a straight unlikable dick. You fall on the other side and you got a character that is hardly a cool character you're going for. Bastion balances nice and easily on this tightrope, making for a great and interesting character.
I take it that it's rather obvious that the characters are just as awesome as the art that portrays them and the story that drives them. Just as the colors would depict, you got a ton of different and unique characters. Even the villains are oddly likable. I mean, even the super big dick last boss villain is likable and makes you go,
oh shit!
Every time he does something rad, which happens rather often. No big dick last boss supervillain would be perfect without his goons, and we got everything from a psychotic red tiger and a crime boss crocodile, to a face-shifting lunatic, to a real femme fatale stepmother. It even has a fucking rhyming, sentient, flesh-eating glob of goo.
That's awesome in so many ways!
Even the supporting characters are interesting and awesome in their own regard. Like, what about a big perverted shark with a fake accent? Or a super friendly resistance fighting blind bird? How does a super sarcastic reindeer tickle your fancy? The cool thing is that if you read the comic, I don't even need to mention any more for you to know what character I'm talking about. So when I say super rad evil cockatrice, I hope you're all thinking of this dude. Look how fucking awesome he is! It's fucking radical!
And now for the complaints.
Like I mentioned before, the names can go from being super simple and easily recognizable to really overcomplicated names, and I really think it would be 10 times better if you had simple and easy recognizable names. Also, sometimes the comic introduces a little too many characters at the same time, making you lose track of who is who for a short period of time.
And that's basically it.
Also, as a little bonus tidbit, if you are like me and you like the characters and want to learn more about what makes them tick and act, then there's an entire volume called Prelude that's telling you more about what the characters were up to before the story began. The premise is a 9. This is arguably the best story I've ever had to cover on the webcomic relief. I constantly want to know more, and I swear this is one of the comics I'll be returning to even long after the review is done. There's no doubt that David and Liz has a story figured out here and know exactly what they want to tell with it. The art is a 10, plain and simple, that's it. This is the new pinnacle that other comics art will now be compared to. We're talking about an art style that is completely its own thing that makes me use words like Disney when praising it. Things are conveyed super well through the art. There's themes and a billion expressions in a rather simple style. I simply love it. The characters are an 8. There's so many characters, all fleshed out and deep. They honestly feel like they had a life before you met them in the comic. My best suggestion to rank up those last 2 points would probably be to have these super awesome characters play a little on how much you know them. Have them do something they normally wouldn't do for the sake of drama or something, I don't know. The characters are super good, but it feels like they're missing something. All in all, the comic is a 9. I am truly honored and happy that I got to review this comic on this show. I will go as far as to say that this is the best webcomic I've ever read, and I found a new favorite webcomic of all time. This is an epic story that I want to follow as much as any other book series I have ever read.
Now a lot of you guys will probably call bullshit on this review, thinking that I have just let myself be bribed by the fact that David and Liz sent me those books to review. But let me just say that if you read this comic for more than an hour, you will easily agree with everything I've said. I'll see you guys at the next webcomic release. Find my big fancy book. I got one big fancy book and I can't find it. What the fuck are the chances?
Only one thing stands between the darkness and carnage. Dreamkeepers, the graphic novel saga, available only at dreamkeeperscomic.com.